Now, to fully conclude the templates for now, I want to come back to our 404 page. What if I enter an invalid month name here? At the moment, this shows us this month is not supported, and that's coming from the views.py file where we return this HTTP response not found response. Now, the problem here is that this is still a place where we have hard-coded HTML inside of our views file. And that's typically what we want to avoid, as you learned. Now, the thing is, if you are using HTTP response not found, you are responsible for producing the HTML content that should go in there. Now, you could, of course, use render to string again to convert a template here. And that's something I want to do here for a start. I will go to my root templates folder in the project and add a 404 HTML file. This should be my base template for 404 errors. Here, I will actually also extend. We can do that here as well. So I will extend my base HTML file. But then, as a page title, I'll say something went wrong. We could not find that page. And end that block here. Like this. Let me actually structure it like this to make it a bit easier to read. And here I need a closing quote. And then I also have my block for the content. And we also need to, of course, end this block. And in here, I'll say we could not find that page or something like that. Sorry, but we could not find a matching page. So that's now my 404 template based on the base HTML file with some 404 specific content. Now I want to return this HTML file if we have a 404 error. Now we can use render to string as I mentioned. For this we again need to import Django template loader and from there import render to string. And then with that imported, here we can render the 404 HTML file to string. We don't need to specify anything else here because it's in the root templates folder, which we have added to our template dirs. And that gives us our response data, which we now can add to the HTTP response not found response, like this. And with that, if we save this and I reload, I see my 404 template. This works. We can't use the render shortcut function here though, because that always renders a success response. And we also want to send the 404 status code along with the response. You can see it in the browser developer tools. If you go to the network tab, here if you reload, you see that has that 404 response status code, which we should send along with the response to have a technically correct and, correctly classified response. So therefore, using render, the render shortcut won't work here. Of course, this approach works, but since this is such a standard case that you want to send back a specific 404 page for 404 errors, Django has another shortcut we can use here. Instead of importing render to string, from Django HTTP, we can import, instead of HTTP response, which we don't need anymore in this file, HTTP 404. That's another class we can import from Django HTTP. And I removed HTTP response because we're not using that anymore anywhere in this file. Now, HTTP 404 is now not a response which you create like this and which you return. Instead, what that is it's a class that you raise as an error. So here you would raise HTTP 404 like this. And you can then pass an error message to that if you want to. Now what this will do automatically, because it's built into Django, is it will look for a 404 HTML file in your templates folders. So you should place such a file in your root templates folder then. It also has to be named 404 HTML for Django to find it, because it will look for specifically that file. With that though, if you save this and reload, you get this page here during development, because there the debug equals true setting is set. But as you see down there, if we would set this to false in our settings, we would see our standard 404 page. And we can briefly check this by going to settings py, and there we have this debug setting, which is set to true. Now we can't set it to false here, because then our development server won't work anymore. But we would set this to false when we deploy our application, something I'll show you later in the course, of course. And if that is set to false, instead of that debug page, which you see to get extra information, you would see that 404 template we set up. So that's another way of returning that 404 template, and that is maybe the better way, because you then don't have to render that 404 template to a string all the time. Instead, you just raise that error, and Django will automatically return that 404 HTML file for you. So now I'll set debug back to true though, so that I can restart my development server again, because as mentioned, this does not work with debug set to false. And that's now it for templates for the moment. We covered all the important cases now which you will encounter in your web applications and your websites, and therefore as a next step, I instead want to focus on making this a bit more pretty and adding CSS and therefore adding static files.